You guys have been harassing me since the last comparison, so here it is. In today's video, I'll be comparing the Alienware AW2720HF, along with my 3.5-year-old BenQ Zowie XL2540, the ViewSonic Elite XG270, and the HP Omen X27, which I was personally excited about. Couple disclaimers, I would have tested the MSI MAG251RX instead of the Omen, but when I purchased it, apparently it was oversold, so I was refunded and went with the Omen instead. Also, the resolution and sizes between some of these monitors will vary. Some monitors only have one size variant or do have other size models, but were not available at the time that I purchased these, such as the 25-inch Alienware, which is why I'll be making another video comparing the 27-inch model to the 25-inch model. Now, some people may not consider this to be an apples-to-apples comparison, but I don't really think it's that big of a deal. Size and resolution is just more of a preference. Plus, this is all I had to work with since the pandemic screwed up inventory everywhere, so give me a break. There will be timestamps over here, and in the description below if you're looking for a particular topic. Lastly, being that I'm a one-man army that has a full-time job, I spent a boatload of time just researching, testing, script writing, proofreading, filming, and editing this comparison for you. So please leave a like, comment, subscribe, or even support me on Patreon for as little as $1. Any interaction helps the YouTube algorithm recommend my videos, even a dislike. Anyway, let's begin. First is setup. The Alienware, ViewSonic, and Zowie had all the same setup. Take the monitor, stand, and base out of the box, attach the stand to the base, then mount the monitor to the stand. No screwdriver required. The Omen was by far the easiest setup I've ever seen. Take the stand with the attached base and the monitor out of the box, and attach the monitor to the stand like so. It can't get any easier than that. In terms of input-output, or I/O, the Zowie has two HDMI 2.0 ports, a DisplayPort 1.2, a DVI-DL port, a headphone and microphone jack, and a USB 3.0 Type B port to power the 2-port USB 3.0 Type A hub. The Alienware has a similar layout with some extras, having two HDMI 2.0 ports, a DisplayPort 1.2, a headphone jack pass-through on the back of the monitor with the headphone jack being on the bottom of the monitor, as well as a USB 3.0 Type B port to power the 4 USB 3.0 Type A ports, with 2 located on the rear of the monitor and 2 located on the bottom of the monitor. The ViewSonic also has 2 HDMI 2.0 ports, a DisplayPort 1.2, a headphone jack, as well as a USB 3.1 Type B port to power the 3 USB 3.1 Type A ports on the rear of the monitor. Then lastly, we have the Omen, which has a USB 3.0 Type B port to power the 2 USB 3.0 Type A ports, 1 HDMI 2.0 port, and a DisplayPort 1.4, both of which have HDCP support. If you don't know what that means, I'll link a video in the description explaining exactly what that is. In a nutshell, it's a garbage piece of technology. Now let's talk about the build and design of these monitors. Starting with the Zowie, it's black with red trim in one form or another, with a very industrial design, making it look very rugged and strong, though I wouldn't recommend testing that. It has pretty thick bezels by today's standards, but are symmetrical all around. Material-wise, the stand is made of metal, with the base and monitor being made of high-quality plastic. Then we have the ViewSonic. The base is made of metal, but is very wide and long, unnecessarily taking up a lot of desk space. The stand is slightly arched and is made with a mixture of mostly high-quality plastic with some metal, and the monitor is made of high-quality plastic. The monitor is all black and has extremely thin top and side bezels, but has a huge chin. There's a hexagonal RGB light on the rear of the monitor, along with RGB lights on the bottom of the monitor to make your desk glow whatever color you want. Next is the Omen. It's black with its tribal red logo on the rear, and just like the ViewSonic, it has extremely thin top and side bezels, but an even bigger chin. There's a single LED on the bottom of the monitor, which is customizable to any color you can possibly imagine. The monitor is very edgy, with no rounded corners apart from the rear of the monitor, and build-wise, it has an all-metal base and stand, with the monitor being made of high-quality plastic. Then lastly is the Alienware. This one is by far my favorite design of all time, which gives off a very strong Mass Effect feel. The monitor is made of mostly high-quality plastic. It has this gorgeous, I think, light gray matte finish with a little bit of black trim sprinkled in there. And just like the last two monitors, it has thin top and side bezels with a chin, but having the smallest one of the bunch and being made of metal. Now, I don't typically like legs that spread out like this because they usually take up a lot of desk space. However, I think this is the only way they should have done it when it comes to this monitor, so good job, Alienware design team. There's also Alienware's trademark alien and strip design on the rear, and both are RGB. And though I think it looks awesome, you'll never see it because it'll most likely be up against a wall. A light on the bottom of the monitor would have been better for daily use. Now let's talk about some of the small details these manufacturers added to make daily use with these monitors better. The Zowie, Alienware, and ViewSonic have tilt, height, swivel, and pivot adjustments, while the Omen only has tilt and height. And even though it doesn't have swivel, it's very easy to move left and right because of its small profile, roundish stand, so I don't consider that to be too much of an issue. All monitors have a matte finish and have great anti-glare properties, so you won't have any issues with your ceiling light or other reflections unless you have a bright flashlight pointing at them directly. The Zowie weighs 16.8 pounds and the ViewSonic weighs 16.2 pounds, so they're not light, which means that their carrying handle is very much appreciated if you're on the go at all. The Alienware and Omen don't include a carrying handle, so the Alienware's 18.2 pounds and the Omen's 16.2 pounds will be much more awkward and harder to carry gracefully. If you decide to get the Omen, make sure you do not carry it from the neck. There's a button over there which will release the monitor from the stand, and if you're carrying it from there, the monitor might release and fall from your hands. All 4 monitors have 100 by 100 VESA mounting support, allowing you to mount this to a monitor arm or stand. For the Omen, it's not built into the monitor, but it comes with a plate that you can attach to the back of the monitor in replacement of the stand to make it VESA compatible. There are wire routing holes on all 4 monitors, so wiring looks less messy. The ViewSonic and Alienware also include an I/O cover to hide the wires from being visible. The ViewSonic has a built-in cable bungee so your mouse wire doesn't get in your way. The Zowie and ViewSonic include these shields for the side of your monitor. They're not pre-installed and are not mandatory to install in case you don't like them. Their purpose is to keep side reflections from hitting your monitor, help you focus by blocking out distractions from your side, and possibly prevent others from screen looking when you're at a LAN center or party. The Zowie, ViewSonic, and Omen have headphone holders, with the Zowies and ViewSonics being on the left side of the monitor and the Omens being on the rear. Next is on-screen displays, or OSD. Why does this matter? Okay, say your monitor looks great when you're watching a movie or a YouTube video such as this one, but then you want to play a competitive game such as CSGO, Rainbow Six Siege, Valorant, and the like. You'll want settings that'll help you give you a competitive edge, such as a black equalizer, to see enemies if they're hiding in dark spots, overdrive to reduce motion blur, or maybe even a color vibrance feature to bring more color to games that have a grayscale-ish color theme. Not only that, but you'll want a quick and easy way to switch between profiles you made for your content consumption as well as for gaming. You don't want your gaming profile when you're consuming content because everything will be blown out with crazy white saturation, and you don't want to have to keep switching multiple things in your OSD every time you switch tasks. That would be annoying. So what OSDs do these monitors have? Are they intuitive, and how easy is it to switch profiles? Well, we'll start with the Alienware. The Alienware has a nipple as well as 4 buttons to navigate through its OSD. Starting with the game menu, you have things like preset modes, which will allow you to select different profiles. All changes you've made while you're on that profile will save automatically. You also have a response time adjuster as well as a black equalizer, or dark stabilizer as they call it. Moving on to the Alien effects lighting, you can adjust the RGB light on both the stand and the Alien, but you cannot adjust them independently from one another. Then you have the display menu, which lets you adjust your typical brightness, contrast, and sharpness. Then lastly is the personalized menu. You can set up any of the OSD's functions to one of the buttons on the rear as a shortcut to quickly change things without having to navigate through the entire OSD. Switching between profiles is very easy as long as you have it set to one of the shortcuts. Click on any of the OSD buttons. Then for the default setup, you can click on the second button from the top, which will bring up the preset mode, which lets you choose between any of the profiles. I personally would only adjust standard and FPS because I don't want to keep going all the way down to game 1 to activate my game profiles, then go all the way back to standard for content consumption. Overall though, it's a fine OSD. Next we have what I consider to be the gold standard of OSDs, which is the Zowie. For those who are not familiar with the Zowie, it has what's called an S-switch, which is basically just a remote to control your OSD and to switch between profiles super easy. Zowie's OSD is logically laid out. There's a dedicated game settings area to change things that you may want to change for gaming, and picture settings to change your typical picture settings. Very easy to navigate. The best part about the S-switch isn't how easy it makes navigating the OSD though. My favorite part is the 3 profile buttons on the bottom of the S-switch, which are used to save up to 3 different profiles. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Every manufacturer needs to include something like this. Or do they? Let's take a look at the Omen. With the Omen, you have 4 buttons on the rear of the monitor which are flush with the rear monitor panel, with no bumps or anything to distinguish which of the 4 buttons you're pressing. So, not off to a great start. Once you do figure out which button your finger is on, you're presented with a logically laid out menu with image settings to adjust your typical image settings, color settings, and gamer settings like overdrive. The crappy OSD buttons kind of gets redeemed here a little bit because HP has a piece of software you can download called Omen Command Center, which for some reason you can only get from the Microsoft Store, which I'm not a fan of. This software lets you control your OSD functions through software rather than having to figure out which button you're pushing, though you can only control a handful of those options. You have picture mode, which is the same as the OSD's picture mode, lighting to control the single RGB LED, and a display option to activate a crosshair or increase response time. That's about the only notable things you could change. Another cool thing is that you can create other profiles and just click on whichever one you want to quickly activate. Just make sure that you click on this little controller here and turn it to manual. Otherwise, if it's on auto and you click on your custom-made profile, it'll switch back to the default profile after 10 seconds. I thought auto would switch automatically between my profiles when I opened a game or closed it, but nothing seemed to happen. I can't figure out how to get it to change automatically. Now, even though I can't control everything that this monitor has, doing it through software is a genius thing and gives me hope for the future of not only HP's OSD, but other manufacturers as well. At least, that's what I thought until I saw the ViewSonic's OSD. The ViewSonic is controlled by a nipple which is very flimsy, and when you push it in to select your option, sometimes it feels like I did push it in and nothing ends up happening, and sometimes I feel like nothing happened even though it did. This OSD in particular is not that intuitive, at least when you're using the nipple, because ViewSonic also has a software-based OSD called ViewSonic Elite Display Controller, which takes HP's idea and improves on it in every way possible. We'll start with visual settings, which will allow you to turn on and off your adaptive sync, HDR10, and Pure XP. Real quick, if you're not familiar with Pure XP, it's basically an ultra-low motion blur feature, but is unusable because it drops a monitor's absolute peak brightness to 69 nits for the whitest white. So basically you can't see a thing. You might as well play blindfolded. Moving on to mode allows you to control all of the monitor's options. There are a plethora of them. Hertz limiter, response time, black equalizer, sharpness, brightness, blue light filter, color temps, contrast, gamma. It's all here. ViewSonic just tied with Zowie in first place in a way I never saw coming. We're talking about the same company that made this. If you know, you know. Now, the reason why I say it's a tie is because while it's super amazing that you can change everything you need to through software, it's still easier just reaching forward to click on your profile rather than opening some software and then clicking on that profile. Anyway, both the ViewSonic and Zowie are tied for first place and are both the gold standards of OSDs, both being amazing but in their own way, hardware versus software. In third place would be the Alienware, and in fourth would be the Omen, though again, they could beat the Alienware if they improved on their command center. Now let's move on to the part we're all here for, the displays. I'll go over the basics first, then move over to the more technical stuff. And because there are so many different tests for just the display part, I'll be breaking this down into sections with timestamps in the description. Starting with the basics, the Zowie is a 24.5-inch 1080p monitor with a TN panel and has both FreeSync and G-Sync compatibility. The Alienware and ViewSonic are both 27-inch 1080p displays with IPS panels, with the Alienware having both FreeSync and G-Sync compatibility, and the ViewSonic only having G-Sync compatibility. Then there's the Omen, which is a 27-inch 1440p display with a TN panel and has FreeSync 2 compatibility. All monitors are 240Hz displays with the ViewSonic allowing you to overclock. I looked at the ViewSonic manual to see exactly how fast overclocking gets you, but all it says is go beyond the monitor's 240Hz refresh rate, so I'm assuming it's all up to panel lottery and everyone will get different results. I, for example, was able to get an impressive 241Hz, a drastic improvement over the standard 240Hz. When it comes to size though, 27 inches is nice for content consumption and for certain games. However, if you were to get the Alienware or the Omen and you want to be as competitive as possible, get the 25-inch models. That's the optimal size for competitive gaming since it lets you keep the entire game in your field of view. Now, that's not to say that the 27-inch models are not good for competitive use, because if you have great periphery, you'll be totally fine with 27 inches. Especially if you have a long desk, which will allow you to push the monitor further back, giving you the effect of buying a smaller monitor, making the poor pixel density of the 27-inch Alienware and ViewSonic less of an issue. Now, let's talk about features a gaming monitor needs to include to help you become a better gamer. Lower input lag, less motion blur, and a black equalizer. All four monitors advertise a 1 millisecond gray-to-gray response time, with or without overdrive, depending on the monitor. And all monitors do have overdrive. These tests will be conducted using Blurbuster's test with the UFO moving at 1920 pixels per second, which is not as fast as flicking, but close and gives you a good idea of how well these monitors will perform. With the overdrive set to the lowest possible setting on all monitors, They do a really good job. However, as you can see, some do better than others. The Zowie does the worst with its overdrive set to off, with the white dots on the UFO not being completely visible, as well as having a good amount of ghosting. Keep in mind, because this is a super zoomed in photo, it looks much more exaggerated than what it actually looks like, which will apply to all monitors. The Alienware and ViewSonic do about the same job, doing very well, and the Omen seems to do the best, which is expected as is the nature of a TN panel. However, when we turn the overdrive up to their optimal settings, which balances input lag without overshooting the image terribly, this is what the results look like. The Zowie starts to display some corona artifacts. Corona artifacts, also known as inverse ghosting or overshoot, is this inverted ghost looking effect you see behind the UFO. This isn't ghosting though, I don't want you to confuse the two. Ghosting is a trail of slow pixel response, which is what we see when overdrive is off. Instead, overshoot is when you enable a certain level of overdrive and the pixel is trying to change colors super fast and goes beyond the color it's supposed to be. Next, there's the Alienware. I don't know if you've noticed, but nothing changed, and that's because their fast mode, which is their lowest, displays the best results. If we move to faster, it looks worse and has increased input lag. And if we go to extreme, it overshoots and increases input lag further. Then there's the Omen, which also stayed at level 1 because it ends up in the same situation as the Alienware. If we move to level 2 or 3, it looks just like level 1, and if we go to level 4, it looks a little bit better but adds corona artifacts. Lastly is the ViewSonic. With the ViewSonic, their best mode is their second of the 5 total modes that they have. It's hard to tell if anything even changed between 1 or 2, but if you take a closer look at the white dots of the UFO, there is the slightest bit of trailing decrease on level 2 when compared to level 1, so 2 is best. Well, what about the rest? Level 3 ruins the image, level 4 is just slightly better than 3, but worse than 2, and level 5 just does terribly. Next is input lag. Do not confuse this with response time, I see a lot of people doing that. Response time is how long it takes for one pixel to transition from one color to the next. Input lag is how long it takes for your monitor to display an action you've made from your keyboard or your mouse. With that said, how well do these monitors do? The Zowie has an input lag of 3.7 milliseconds with variable refresh rate turned off, and 3.6 milliseconds with it on. However, the Alienware has an input lag of 3 milliseconds with variable refresh rate turned on, and 2.8 milliseconds with it turned off. But you'll never notice a difference between the two monitors. The Omen, on the other hand, has an input lag of 2.8 milliseconds with variable refresh rate turned off, and 5.2 milliseconds with it turned on. That is a bigger gap than the Alienware, though only people with the fastest reaction times may notice that, if at all. Then there's the ViewSonic, which has an input lag of 2.8 milliseconds with variable refresh rate turned off, and 3.8 milliseconds with it turned on. So all 4 monitors do a fantastic job displaying an action you make to your eyeballs super fast. And whichever monitor you go with, you're going to have 0 complaints with any of them. Next is the black equalizer and color vibrance. For those that are not yet familiar with these amazing features, a black equalizer is a color engine technology that only alters the gamma of black and gray shades of color, so you can see enemies in shadows and dark areas easier. And if you watched my last comparison, you'll have remembered some of the IPS monitors overexposing bright areas of a scene, even with the black equalizer turned off. This is a non-issue this time around, so I'll only show you how well they do in the dark. The example we'll be using will be on Escape from Tarkov inside the garage on the interchange map, since that example is about as extreme as it gets. Most monitors look pretty much the same. Grayscale, dark, and hard to see. The exception here is the Omen, which has some added visibility, but not much more, and more color compared to the other 3, but again, not much more. Turn on the black equalizer and things get much easier to see. I'm not sure if you noticed, but the Omen didn't change at all, and that's because it has no black equalizer, which is pathetic if you're marketing this as a gaming monitor, especially for this price. Back to the rest though. The Zowie and ViewSonic have the best black equalizer of the group, cranking up everything to be very visible. The Alienware does do some equalizing, however, it's not as much as the Zowie and the ViewSonic. One thing to note about the Alienware's black equalizer is that even though it has one, it's not that great. Take a look at this. It makes Escape from Tarkov look like Escape from Borderlands. Everything has a thick black outline, kind of like Borderlands. And this doesn't apply to just this game or games in general, this applies everywhere, even the desktop. Anyway, even though the dark areas are easier to see, everything still looks grayscale. There's almost no color for you to distinguish, say, a person using a slightly different shade of green camo armor to blend in with a green metal container, bush, or trailer. Sounds crazy, but that's exactly what Escape from Tarkov is all about. Color is not a problem for most of these monitors, with the Omen being the black sheep of the group again. The Zowie, Alienware, and ViewSonic have a color vibrance option, allowing you to increase the colors, making it easier for you to see enemies trying to blend in with their background. However, just like the black Equalizer, the Alienware is not as cranked as the Zowie or the ViewSonic, but at least it offers it, unlike the Omen. Moving on to the more technical stuff, we're going to cover the color gamut, brightness, contrast, and more. All monitors were calibrated using the X-Rite i1 Display Pro colorimeter with Portrait's CalMan software. I'll be giving you figures with both calibrated and uncalibrated data. And by uncalibrated, I mean I'm just adjusting the monitor settings and the Windows color calibrator to what looks most pleasing to my eye. Why give pre-calibrated data though? Let's be real here. The simple fact is an overwhelming majority of buyers, especially for this segment of monitors, either won't have a good colorimeter, which can be expensive, the software expertise needed for a good calibration, or will never even get their monitor professionally calibrated. With that said, I'll begin with the color gamut. If you're not familiar, color gamut is basically a range of colors that a particular monitor can produce within the three primary colors, red, green, and blue. Starting with the Zowie, it covers only 90% of the sRGB color space, which isn't anything too fantastic, being that the Alienware, Omen, and ViewSonic cover 100%. However, 90% isn't that bad. I haven't thought of it to be that big of an issue for the past 3.5 years I've been using it, and it doesn't look much different from the Omen's 100%. Next is Adobe RGB, which is for professional photo editors. The Zowie only covers 66%, so it's definitely not good for professional use. The Alienware covers a much better 74%, which is usable. The Omen surprisingly covers 79%, and the ViewSonic covers the same as the Alienware at 74%. Lastly, there's the P3 color space, which is for professional video editors. The Zowie only covers 71%, which is not terrible, but not great. It's definitely not recommended for video editors. The Alienware covers a much better 80%, so it's totally fine for editors. The HP surprised me again, covering 87%, which is really good, and the ViewSonic did the same as the Alienware, again at 80%. Next is DeltaEs. What is DeltaE? DeltaE is basically how accurate or inaccurate a color is being reproduced. An average DeltaE of 1 or lower means that the monitor is doing a really good job reproducing color. The difference is indistinguishable from 0 to 1, with 0 being 100% accurate. A DeltaE of 1 to 2 means that there's an extremely small difference and only the trained eye can notice it. 2 to 3 is a medium difference and is obvious to the untrained eye. And 4 or more is just bad and you should calibrate it or get a new monitor if it isn't saved by calibration. Starting with the monitors being uncalibrated, the Zowie gets a hilariously bad DeltaE average of 4.37, so colors won't look like what they're intended to look like. The Alienware gets an average DeltaE of 3.09, the Omen gets 3.52, and the ViewSonic did the best at 1.97. When calibrated, we get much better average DeltaEs on all monitors. The Zowie gets an average of 1.41, which is not perfect, but is perfectly fine and is much better than the 4.37 we had before. Then we have the Alienware, which produces an amazing 0.46. The Omen did 0.72, and the ViewSonic did the best again at 0.33, so nearly perfect. So if you're looking for the best color accuracy pre or post calibration, the ViewSonic does the best here. Lastly is brightness and contrast ratio. The higher a display's contrast ratio, the better visibility you'll get in brighter areas, as well as deeper blacks. I'll also be showing you Legam's contrast ratio test to give you a perspective of what those numbers actually mean. The way this test works is that there are 32 rectangles with different RGB values or shades for each color. A good monitor will not only be able to make out the full range from 1 to 32, but doing so linearly for each rectangle, meaning that the next rectangle isn't drastically different than the previous one. Bad displays won't either be able to show the leftmost few rectangles, won't show a difference between the rightmost few, or will show a big jump from rectangle 31 to 32. Now keep in mind, being that I'm using a camera to give you this information, I will have to adjust the ISO of my camera for the right side of this test, as well as for the left side, which means that I'll have to take multiple pictures per monitor. This will allow me to capture it to as close as possible to the way I see it, because if I don't do it this way, the image could be overexposed on the right or underexposed on the left. Starting with the Zowie, it has a peak brightness of 436 nits and a contrast ratio of 900 to 1. For the darker side of the image, all of the first rectangles are visible. Even the dark blue one, which the camera wasn't able to capture no matter how high I cranked the ISO and how slow I had the shutter speed, while still making this image look somewhat accurate to what I see. Moving on to the other side of the image, all rectangles are increasing in values very linearly, though it's hard to see it with this image, but the Zowie is doing a good job with contrast. Next is the Alienware. The Alienware has a peak brightness of 413 nits with a contrast ratio of 866:1. And even though the Alienware has a slightly lower contrast ratio than the Zowie, when you look at the left side of the image, not only is everything visible to me, but also to the camera. So it seems that the Alienware does a better job on darker colors than the Zowie. Moving on to the rest of the image, it also does a really good job increasing each value for each rectangle linearly. Next is the Omen, which is kind of a double-edged sword. With the monitor's contrast setting set to 70, the Omen will give you a peak brightness of 330 nits. It can be increased by turning on the local dimming function on the monitor, but I personally don't recommend it because it gives you these huge zones which look ugly. Anyway, the monitor boasts a laughable contrast ratio of 580:1. However, if we increase the contrast from 70 to 80 on the monitor setting, the peak brightness goes from 330 to 425 nits, and the contrast ratio goes from 580:1 to a much better but still mediocre 799:1. But this sacrifices the color accuracy, which goes from a DeltaE of 0.72 all the way up to 2.08, which is not that great anymore. Does the lower contrast actually mean anything though? Because as we saw earlier, the Alienware seemed to do a better job than the Zowie despite having lower contrast ratio. Well, in this case, it does seem to matter a little bit. If we look at the image with the monitor's contrast set to 70, the rectangle for blue, green, and cyan are almost invisible. I can see it in person, but I have to look really hard for them. What about when we crank the monitor's contrast to 80? Well, not much changes. So it seems that the Omen just doesn't do that great of a job in general. Moving on to the other side, with the monitor's contrast settings set to 70, the monitor does a pretty good job increasing values for each rectangle pretty linearly. And even though it has poor contrast ratio on paper, it still does a good job making sure that rectangle 31 and 32 aren't drastically different. This also applies to 80 contrast, which just makes the image look brighter, but keeping the same results. Lastly then is the ViewSonic, which has a peak brightness of 409 nits and a contrast ratio of 869:1. This monitor looks to have the best contrast overall, making all of the first rectangles clearly visible. Moving on to the other side, it has very good results as well, with linear increases with each rectangle. So overall, the Alienware and ViewSonic have the best color accuracy, contrast, and gamut coverage, with the exception of the Omen with its surprisingly good Adobe RGB and P3 color gamut. Though the Zowie had the highest contrast on paper, the Alienware and ViewSonic seem to do a better job when we look at the contrast test, and the Zowie just got straight up creamed on color accuracy and color gamut. Next is content consumption. The ViewSonic and Omen both include HDR10, which is a static form of HDR, meaning that there's no metadata being used to adjust the brightness and contrast on a frame-by-frame basis. The monitor's peak brightness is around 400 nits, so I didn't really notice any enhancement when it came to my content consumption. But how are these monitors when it comes to consuming content? Well, the Zowie and the Omen are fine, but nothing special. The Alienware and ViewSonic have better color accuracy and viewing angles, but here's the thing. If you watch my last comparison, I didn't think that those IPS monitors were that much better because those IPS panels just didn't seem to do an outstanding enough job to make me want to switch. However, that's changed with the Alienware and ViewSonic because they're much better than those last bunch. Angles are great all around on both the Alienware and ViewSonic compared to the Zowie and Omen, which do okay on the side, great from the top, and terrible from the bottom. But I mean, we all know IPS is better than TN when it comes to viewing angles, so what's different this time? Well, one thing I started noticing when testing all these monitors is that with the TN monitors, the Zowie in particular, even when it looks straight on, there's some off-angle discoloration at the top third of the monitor, which I never noticed until now, making me appreciate IPS a lot more than before. To elaborate, I always have my monitor sitting lower than me and angled straight to my face. During testing, I started to notice that if I angle the monitor towards my chest rather than my face, I get less angle discoloration, meaning that I have to aim the TN panels toward my chest for the best results. This is obviously not an issue with the IPS panels. Now, this really only applies to consuming content, not when playing games, because when it comes to gaming, you're so hyper-focused that you don't even notice it. But everywhere else, you will. So I much more prefer the Alienware and the ViewSonic compared to the Zowie and the Omen. So in conclusion, which monitor should you get, and do any of these monitors finally overthrow the king of 240Hz? Well, if you've been keeping track, you should already know the answer to this. At a price point of around $400 for the Zowie, Alienware, and the ViewSonic, and $650 for the Omen, the ViewSonic is by far the best choice. It has the best color accuracy, both pre-calibrated and post-calibrated. It has the fastest input lag along with the Omen and the Alienware. The OSD is as good as the Zowie's, but in a software sense rather than hardware. The black equalizer is also as good as the Zowie's, and trust me, that is no easy feat. It has amazing response time, and even though it's not as good as the Omen's response time, it's damn near close and beats the Zowie and Alienware, and we cannot forget about that amazing 241Hz overclock. This kind of confused me when I started testing and seeing results, because the Alienware is by far the most requested monitor I've ever had, so I just assumed it was that good. However, I kept getting a mixture of requests for both the 25-inch and 27-inch version of the Alienware, and I kept hearing that the 25-inch model is better, so I will get the 25-inch model and test it for you guys, maybe in the next video, I'm not sure yet. But as it stands, there is no reason for you to get the Alienware, Zowie, or especially the Omen when you have the XG270, as long as you don't mind it being 27 inches. Now don't forget, I've only tested a handful of monitors and there could be better monitors out there. However, as a whole package, I highly doubt that, but we'll see as I test more monitors. There's been one question I've been asking myself while doing this review though. Is it better than the Zowie XL2540 with DIAC or their newly released XL2540S with DIAC Plus? I mean, I have no doubts the ViewSonic will have better color accuracy and viewing angles compared to those other Zowies, but maybe not when it comes to ghosting and input lag. I don't know, and I won't know until I get them because I will not be watching any reviews on them. But you know who does want to watch reviews on them? You guys. If someone at Zowie is watching, or if you know someone at Zowie, let them know that I am interested in testing out their monitor for all of you guys. I sent them a review sample request, but because I'm a small YouTuber, they don't care about me and they never responded. Now, even though the XG270 is the best one here, I won't be keeping it, and for two main reasons. Number one, the wire routing hole anchor thingy came broken and I can't fix it, and number two, I'm impatiently waiting for the new 1440p 240Hz variant of the EVE Spectrum, which looks like it's going to be the best all-around monitor ever. If it doesn't turn out to be as good as it was hyped up to be, however, I'll end up returning it and purchase an XG270 for myself. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. If you guys enjoyed it, please leave a like and smash that red subscribe button to support the channel. I'll love you forever. You guys have no clue how much effort it took me to make this video. Also, follow me on my socials, which are down below in a pinned comment, and consider supporting me on Patreon for as low as $1, one freedom dollar. Anyways, guys, have a great day, every day. Peace. Once you do figure out which finger your button is on, wait, what?